What do you do when your own father cuts off your credit cards in public? Just to force you to surrender your life's work to your incompetent brother? He honestly believed a declined card for a $300 vet bill would make me drop to my knees and beg. He had no idea his arrogance just triggered the detonator buried beneath his entire empire. He was about to learn who really controlled the money. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Before we begin, I want to sincerely thank you all for your incredible support. But unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to continue operating, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform for the foreseeable future. Instead, we are moving our operations to Patreon. So if you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us there to listen to even more amazing, longer, and highly detailed, exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join our new home by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us dive into today's story as I tell you the tale of Rose Santiago. The fluorescent lights of the veterinary clinic buzzed with a low, irritating hum that usually gave me a headache. Today, however, my focus was entirely on Buster, my golden retriever mix rescue, who was leaning heavily against my legs after receiving his vaccinations. I stood at the reception counter, a woman of 32 years old who had spent the better part of her adult life putting out corporate fires, waiting for the receptionist to hand back my sleek, heavy metal corporate credit card. The bill was exactly $300. It was a microscopic drop in the bucket for an executive at Apex Sentinel Group. But when the young woman behind the counter swiped the card through the machine, the system beeped a harsh, dissonant tone. "I am so sorry, Miss Santiago," the receptionist stammered, her cheeks flushing a deep shade of pink. "It seems your card has been declined." I blinked, staring at the small digital screen. Declined. The word did not make sense. I was the chief technology officer of a cybersecurity firm that handled multi-million-dollar government contracts. There were no spending limits on that luxury corporate card. I looked at the receptionist's embarrassed eyes and instantly knew this was not a simple bank error. My gut tightened. The only person with the authority to freeze an executive card, like that, was the chief executive officer, my father. Without saying a word, I stepped away from the counter and pulled my phone from my purse. I dialed his private number. He answered on the second ring, and I did not even have to speak first. "I see you found out," Marcus Santiago said. His voice was thick with a smug, condescending satisfaction that made my stomach turn. He sounded exactly like a king talking down to a disobedient peasant. "You froze my corporate cards over a $300 vet bill," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I kept my tone low, practically a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus chuckled. A wet, arrogant sound. "I froze everything. Rose, your corporate cards, your expense accounts, your company vehicle privileges. Consider it a necessary lesson. You have grown entirely too comfortable and far too arrogant lately. You need to remember your place in this family and in this company." I stood near the clinic's glass doors, watching the afternoon traffic crawl by. "My place," I repeated flatly. "Exactly," Marcus barked, his tone shifting from amused to commanding. "You think you can just disrespect your brother and humiliate him in front of the family? Dante is the heir to this empire. He needs to build his portfolio, and you are standing in his way. So, here is my demand. You are going to step down as Chief Technology Officer. You are going to hand your entire position over to Dante, and you are going to smile while you do it. If you refuse, I will leave you financially starved. Let us see how long you can survive without the privileges I provide." He paused, clearly waiting for my reaction. He expected me to cry. He expected me to scream, to panic, or to beg him to turn my cards back on. He thrived on that kind of toxic control. Instead, I gave him absolutely nothing. I did not sigh. I did not breathe heavily. I just let a dead, suffocating silence stretch across the line. For 5 agonizing seconds, I let him sit in that void. Then, without a single word of rebuttal, I simply ended the call. I walked back to the receptionist, who was nervously pretending to organize some paperwork. I opened a hidden zipper compartment deep inside my wallet and pulled out a plain, standard-issue debit card. It was tied to a secret personal account that had absolutely zero connection to Apex Sentinel Group or my father. I tapped it on the machine. A cheerful chime confirmed the payment was approved. "Thank you," I told the receptionist, my voice steady and warm. I gathered Buster's leash and gently guided my tired dog out of the clinic and into the crisp autumn air. I opened the back door of my vehicle and helped Buster up onto the seat. Only when I was safely buckled into the driver's seat did I allow my true feelings to surface. I looked at my own reflection in the rearview mirror, and a slow, freezing cold smile spread across my face. My father thought he had just cut off my oxygen. He thought a locked credit card would force me to surrender my life's work. But as I sat there, I realized my tolerance for this family had officially run out. The charade was over. It was time to show Marcus Santiago who truly held the power to destroy his empire. If you walked past any upscale newsstand in downtown Seattle, you would inevitably see my father's face staring back at you from the glossy covers of prestigious business magazines. Marcus Santiago was relentlessly painted by the media as the ultimate self-made hero, the visionary founder and brilliant mastermind behind Apex Sentinel Group, a rapidly rising star in the private cybersecurity sector. The feature articles always highlighted his sharp jawline, his custom-tailored Italian suits, and his supposed unparalleled genius for navigating the treacherous, hyper-competitive waters of the modern tech industry. He loved the flashing bulbs of the cameras, and the cameras loved his carefully crafted illusion of absolute, unwavering corporate control. However, that shiny, meticulously curated public relations narrative was a spectacular lie, hiding a dark, rotting, and frankly pathetic truth. Exactly 4 years ago, Apex Sentinel Group was absolutely not a rising star in any sense of the word. It was a violently sinking ship, taking on water so incredibly fast that the senior executives were quietly packing their cardboard boxes in the middle of the night to avoid the fallout. We were standing on the absolute jagged brink of total, catastrophic bankruptcy. The iceberg that had mercilessly torn our financial hull apart was none other than my younger brother, Dante. My father, entirely blinded by his obsessive, old-fashioned need to hand the corporate kingdom over to his precious male heir, had foolishly given Dante absolute carte blanche over our flagship software development division. Dante, armed with an absurd amount of unearned confidence and absolutely zero actual technical competence, proceeded to carelessly throw tens of millions of dollars into a massive black hole of horribly flawed, heavily bugged software projects. He blindly chased flashy, superficial industry trends while completely ignoring basic, fundamental security protocols, resulting in a core product that was practically a wide-open welcome mat for international hackers. The commercial banks panicked. Our nervous creditors began circling the corporate headquarters like starving vultures. The company was exactly less than 30 days away from total foreclosure and liquidation. I remember sitting alone in my cramped, windowless office, watching my father physically age 10 years in a single, stressful week. Despite his insufferable arrogance, this company was his entire lifeblood, his sole identity. I knew with absolute certainty that if Apex Sentinel Group went under, the humiliation would completely break him. But I also knew something else that stayed my hand. If I simply walked into his lavish corner office and handed him a massive personal check to save the day, his incredibly fragile, fiercely patriarchal ego would never, ever recover. He would deeply resent me for the rest of his life for emasculating him, for undeniably proving that the quiet daughter he constantly overlooked was the one who had to swoop in and rescue the golden son he mindlessly worshipped. So, I was forced to devise an entirely different rescue plan, a plan deeply wrapped in corporate shadows and impenetrable legal secrecy. While Dante was busy ruining the family company, I had been spending my late nights aggressively writing complex code in my apartment. Over 2 years, I had successfully developed and legally patented a genuinely revolutionary military-grade encryption algorithm, working through quiet back channels. I silently sold that unique patent to a major international defense contractor for an astonishing, life-changing sum of money, virtually overnight. I possessed a level of hidden personal wealth that rivaled the net worth of some small island nations. But instead of flaunting my new fortune, I chose to weaponize it to save my ungrateful family from their own catastrophic stupidity. Instead of injecting the cash directly into the failing company where my father could see it, I hired a ruthless team of elite corporate attorneys in New York, all bound by ironclad, unbreakable non-disclosure agreements. Through their meticulous legal maneuvering, I silently established a shadowy, completely anonymous private investment fund incorporated in the state of Delaware. I named it Obsidian Holdings, operating purely from the unseen shadows of the financial world. Obsidian Holdings swooped in and aggressively purchased every single ounce of Apex Sentinel Group's toxic, defaulting bad debt from the terrified commercial banks. We bought the debt for pennies on the dollar, effectively consolidating all the outstanding loans under one absolute, centralized authority. In the rapid span of exactly 48 hours, the panicking banks were paid off in full. The imminent foreclosure threats completely vanished, and Apex Sentinel Group was miraculously pulled back from the brink of financial death. My father was absolutely euphoric. He threw a lavish, champagne-fueled company party, loudly boasting to anyone who would listen about how his brilliant, high-pressure negotiation tactics had successfully convinced a faceless, heavyweight Wall Street investment firm to believe in his grand vision and bail him out. He strutted through the corporate corridors, entirely convinced that Obsidian Holdings was run by a ruthless syndicate of gray-haired, cigar-smoking billionaires in Manhattan who viewed him as an equal peer. He had absolutely no idea that the supreme creditor, the mysterious financial savior holding the absolute, terrifying power of life and death over his precious corporate empire, was the very same daughter he consistently treated like a glorified, expendable IT worker. For 4 long, grueling years, I kept my mouth tightly shut. I swallowed my immense pride and dutifully maintained my role as the chief technology officer. While Marcus was out giving arrogant keynote speeches at tech conventions, and Dante was busy playing golf with prospective clients, I was permanently locked in the freezing server rooms, consistently pulling 80-hour work weeks. I silently gutted Dante's disastrous, broken code, completely restructured our internal network systems from the ground up, and practically single-handedly rebuilt the technological foundation of the entire company. I poured my blood, sweat, and fading sanity into making Apex Sentinel Group highly profitable again. Simply so, my father could comfortably continue living in his grand, uninterrupted delusion of power and unparalleled greatness. I generously allowed him to believe he was the untouchable king of the castle, but I was the phantom who owned the very land that his castle was built upon. And today, he had just made the fatal, unforgivable mistake of attempting to lock the true owner out of her own property. The catalyst for this entire disaster began exactly 7 days ago. After months of grueling negotiations and endless security audits, I successfully closed the largest deal in the history of our company. It was a massive, highly classified government security contract worth exactly $50 million. I had personally designed every single line of the architectural framework for the bid. I sat in a sterile briefing room in Washington and verbally sparred with 4-star generals, utterly decimating our massive global competitors. It was my victory, secured entirely by my intellect, naturally. My father demanded a lavish family dinner that Sunday evening at his sprawling, gated estate to celebrate the company's newfound fortune. We sat around a massive mahogany dining table, surrounded by priceless art and crystal chandeliers. It was supposed to be a celebration, but the air was thick with unspoken jealousy. That was when Eleanor made her calculated move. Eleanor was Dante's wife, a woman whose insatiable greed was matched only by her cunning ability to manipulate the fragile egos of the men around her. She wore a silk designer dress and a sickeningly sweet smile as she casually swirled her expensive red wine. "Marcus," Eleanor began, her voice dripping with artificial innocence, "this new government contract is simply magnificent. It truly elevates the company to the global stage. But Considering Dante is going to take over the empire one day, he desperately needs a monumental legacy project under his belt. The shareholders need to see him as a strong, capable leader. I think Dante should be the executive director of this new $50 million initiative. I stopped cutting my steak. I looked across the table at my brother. Dante was leaning back in his chair, swirling his own glass of wine, wearing a smug, entitled smirk that made my blood boil. He did not even have the spine to ask for the project himself. He let his gold-digging wife do the heavy lifting while he waited to collect the crown. "That is a brilliant idea, Eleanor," Marcus declared, slamming his hand on the table in enthusiastic agreement. He looked at Dante with absolute blind adoration. A project of this magnitude requires a strong masculine presence at the helm to deal with the military brass. Rose, you will hand over all the executive briefs to your brother on Monday morning. You can stay on as his technical assistant to handle the minor coding details. I slowly wiped my mouth with a linen napkin. I reached into my leather briefcase resting beside my chair and pulled out a heavy, 200-page spiral-bound folder. I tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a loud, aggressive thud that rattled the expensive silverware. "That is a comprehensive, the third-party audit of Dante's departmental performance over the last 36 months, I said, my voice dangerously calm. His current projects have an 85% failure rate. He has successfully deployed 0 viable products. He spent $2 million on a biometric scanning initiative that was hacked by a group of teenagers in less than 12 hours. If you put him in charge of a $50 million classified military grid, he will not just bankrupt this company. He will end up in a federal prison for criminal negligence. The answer is absolutely no." The dining room fell into a dead, horrifying silence. Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearls in a pathetic display of mock outrage. Dante's face turned a violent shade of crimson, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. But it was my father's reaction that sealed their fate. Marcus stood up so violently that his heavy oak chair crashed backward onto the marble floor. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated patriarchal rage. In his archaic mind, a daughter publicly defying him and humiliating his chosen male heir was a crime punishable by total excommunication. "How dare you speak to your brother that way?" Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You are nothing but a glorified engineer. I built this company. I am the king of this family, and you will obey my orders, or I will break you." I did not flinch. I simply stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out the front door without looking back. I learned later from a loyal assistant that the moment I left, the three of them retreated into my father's private study. Marcus, Dante, and Eleanor poured themselves expensive scotch and spent the next 3 hours plotting my financial execution. In their twisted, delusional reality, they firmly believed I was just another greedy employee living entirely off the luxurious perks of the corporation. They assumed that my designer clothes, my apartment, and my entire livelihood were funded exclusively by the company paycheck and the corporate platinum cards. Eleanor was the one who suggested starving me out. They agreed that if they completely cut off my access to the company's financial privileges, I would panic. They thought I would last maybe 3 or 4 days before the sheer terror of poverty would force me to crawl back to the estate, drop to my knees, apologize to Dante, and hand over the $50 million contract just to get my credit cards turned back on. They had plotted to teach me a lesson about power, but they were playing checkers. While I owned the entire board, I sat perfectly still in the driver's seat of my heavily armored SUV, the engine idling with a reassuring purr while Buster dozed peacefully in the back seat. I did not put the vehicle into drive. I did not head toward the glowing glass towers of the downtown corporate district where I was supposed to be working. Instead, I reached deep into the hidden compartment located underneath the center console and pulled out a matte black, heavily encrypted laptop. This machine was completely untethered from the Apex Sentinel Group network. I booted it up, methodically bypassing 3 separate biometric security layers, including a retinal scan and a complex alphanumeric passphrase, before launching a highly secure, untraceable satellite connection. I opened an encrypted communication channel and dialed a private, Unlisted New York number. It was answered immediately on the first ring, not by a cheerful receptionist, but by Jonathan Vance, the senior managing director of private wealth at one of the most ruthless and powerful investment banks on Wall Street. He was the primary financial custodian for Obsidian Holdings, the man who executed my silent financial warfare. "Good morning, Miss Santiago," Jonathan said, his voice crisp, fiercely alert, and entirely devoid of any unnecessary small talk. "What can I do for you today?" "Good morning, Jonathan," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the bustling street ahead, my voice completely stripped of any lingering emotion. "I need you to initiate a total operational lockdown on the Apex Sentinel Group portfolio. We are executing the cross-default clause, effective immediately." There was a brief, heavy pause on the line, accompanied only by the sound of rapid, aggressive typing echoing softly in the background. "Understood," Jonathan said, completely unfazed by the monumental command. "However, as you are well aware, to legally trigger a cross-default on a commercial loan of this massive magnitude, we need hard, documented proof of a material breach of contract or a severe violation of corporate governance. Has Marcus committed a qualifying infraction?" "He absolutely has," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard of my laptop with practiced precision. "Exactly 10 minutes ago, Marcus Santiago, acting in his official capacity as Chief Executive Officer, unilaterally froze all corporate financial accounts, operational credit lines, and company vehicle privileges assigned to his Chief Technology Officer. He executed this action without a board of directors vote, without a formal disciplinary hearing, without consulting the legal department, and without any documented cause related to my actual technical performance. He initiated this financial embargo purely out of petty personal malice, specifically to force my resignation and unlawfully install an unqualified family member into a senior executive role. That is a textbook violation of fiduciary duty and a catastrophic breach of standard corporate governance," Jonathan confirmed, his tone turning sharply predatory, like a shark smelling blood in the water. "Do you have the digital proof?" "I am uploading the internal system logs to your secure server right now," I said. The data packet clearly shows his unique digital signature authorizing the freeze on my corporate cards, along with the exact timestamp and the glaring lack of any corresponding human resources documentation. I hit the Enter key. A bright green progress bar flashed across my screen, indicating the heavily encrypted files had bypassed all local firewalls and landed directly on a secure Wall Street server 3,000 miles away. "Files received and successfully authenticated," Jonathan stated smoothly. "The evidence of corporate malfeasance is undeniable. The cross-default clause is now fully authorized for deployment. For those who are not intimately familiar with the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of high-level corporate finance, a cross-default clause is essentially a financial nuclear tripwire. When I secretly bought my father's toxic debt 4 years ago through Obsidian Holdings, I made sure my legal team buried this specific, incredibly aggressive clause deep inside the hundreds of pages of the master loan agreement. The clause explicitly states that if the executive management of Apex Sentinel Group commits any act of severe financial mismanagement, ethical violation, or breach of corporate governance, the primary lender has the absolute legal right to instantly declare the entire outstanding principal balance of the loan due in full, immediately. And while that astronomical debt is being processed for collection, the lender is legally authorized to unilaterally seize and freeze every single financial asset tied to the company and its personal guarantors to prevent capital flight. "Execute the protocol, Jonathan," I ordered, my voice dropping to a low, commanding register that echoed the true power I held. "Shut it all down, every single cent." "Initiating the freeze sequence now," Jonathan replied, the rhythmic clicking of his keyboard accelerating into a frantic blur. "We are pushing the automated directives through the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse. We are currently overriding commercial banking authorizations across all platforms. We are now locking all primary operating accounts for Apex Sentinel Group. Payroll reserves are frozen. Vendor payment lines are shut down. International wire transfer capabilities are disabled. I watched my own screen closely as Jonathan mirrored his terminal to my laptop. I saw the massive digital ledgers of my father's empire flashing before my eyes, shifting rapidly from a healthy green status to a glaring, locked red. Take the personal accounts too, I instructed coldly. Marcus signed a sweeping personal guarantee when Obsidian Holdings bought the debt. The clause legally covers all his private assets and holdings. Targeting private assets now, Jonathan confirmed with terrifying, surgical precision. Freezing Marcus Santiago's executive expense accounts. Freezing his private wealth management portfolio at the local Seattle branches. We are now shutting down all supplementary platinum credit cards attached to his primary name. That specifically includes the black cards issued to Dante Santiago and Eleanor Santiago. All corporate and privately guaranteed liquid cash flow is now officially suspended indefinitely. In less than 60 minutes from the exact moment my father arrogantly laughed at me over the phone, the colossal, invisible digital machinery of Wall Street had completely surrounded his empire and slammed the heavy iron gates shut. Every single dollar, every single cent that flowed into his company, his luxury lifestyle, and his family's pockets had been brutally seized by an automated banking algorithm. The transition was completely silent, a flawless digital execution that required no weapons and no shouting. I closed my laptop, the screen going black, and slid it back into the hidden compartment. I leaned back heavily against the leather headrest, letting a deep, deeply satisfying breath escape my lungs. It was a truly beautiful, mathematically perfect trap. Marcus had arrogantly attempted to cut off my financial lifeline to starve me into submission. He honestly believed he was teaching me a harsh lesson about survival and hierarchy, but in his blind, petty rage, he had just unwittingly handed me the exact legal ammunition I needed to lock away his own oxygen. The grand empire he loved significantly more than his own daughter was now entirely paralyzed, suffocating in a vacuum of frozen assets. And the most delicious part was that he did not even know it yet. While Jonathan Vance was executing the digital guillotine on Wall Street, my father, my brother, and my sister-in-law were entirely oblivious, busy bathing in their own manufactured glory. According to the timeline I pieced together later from the showroom security footage and the very eager eyewitness accounts of the staff, the three of them were currently parading around an exclusive high-end exotic car dealership on the wealthy east side of Seattle. They were there to purchase a brand-new, custom-tailored Porsche 911. It was intended to be Dante's ultimate reward, a lavish physical trophy to publicly celebrate his impending promotion and their supposed grand victory over my insubordination. The dealership itself was a pristine temple dedicated to extreme wealth. It featured sprawling, polished white marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and complimentary flutes of imported vintage champagne for serious buyers. Dante was aggressively revving the engine of a sleek, charcoal gray model parked on the showroom floor, laughing loudly while Eleanor draped herself over the passenger seat. She was busy taking a series of obnoxious selfies, carefully angling her phone to ensure the steering wheel logo was perfectly visible for her social media followers. Marcus stood proudly nearby, sipping his champagne, puffing out his chest, and acting exactly like a triumphant conquering emperor surveying his newly won territory. Eventually, a well-dressed senior sales associate, a man who catered exclusively to the richest tech billionaires in the state, ushered the loud trio into a plush private VIP purchasing suite to finalize the paperwork. The initial deposit required to secure the custom vehicle was exactly $50,000. Dante leaned back heavily into a soft leather chair, flashing a painfully arrogant smirk. With a dramatic, highly practiced flick of his wrist, he tossed his heavy metal corporate black card onto the polished glass desk. It made a solid, satisfying clink. He did not even bother to look the salesman in the eye, simply waving his hand and demanding that they run the charge quickly so he could get back to his celebration. The salesman smiled politely, picked up the card, and inserted it into the sleek point of sale terminal. He typed in the $50,000 amount and firmly hit the enter key. A sharp, aggressive electronic beep echoed through the quiet room. The digital screen flashed a bright red warning message. Transaction denied. Card deactivated. Dante scoffed, rolling his eyes in exaggerated annoyance. Run it again, he snapped, leaning forward with a sudden burst of irritation. Your machine is obviously broken. Do you have any idea who we are? Just force it through. The salesman maintained his calm, professional customer service smile, though his eyes narrowed slightly at Dante's disrespectful tone. He removed the card and swiped it a second time. The machine emitted the exact same harsh, rejecting tone. Beep. I apologize, sir, but the issuer has completely restricted this account, the salesman explained softly, pushing the useless, heavy piece of metal back across the glass desk. It says the account is frozen. Marcus immediately lost his temper, feeling his precious public image threatened in front of a stranger. He slammed his empty champagne flute onto the table. This is utterly ridiculous, my father barked, his face turning a familiar shade of angry purple. You people are entirely incompetent. My company generates tens of millions of dollars a year. Step aside. Dante, I will handle this small inconvenience myself. Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his tailored Italian suit jacket and dramatically pulled out his own personal, gold-plated VIP credit card. It was his ultimate status symbol, directly linked to his primary executive wealth account. He slapped it directly into the salesman's open hand, glaring at the man with absolute, burning contempt. Use this one, Marcus ordered coldly, and I expect a significant discount applied to the final purchase price for this embarrassing inconvenience. The salesman silently took the gold card, swiped it through the magnetic reader, and waited for the network connection. Beep. Transaction denied. The heavy silence that instantly fell over the VIP suite was sudden, thick, and entirely suffocating. Marcus stared blankly at the red flashing screen on the terminal, his jaw practically dropping to the floor. The supreme confidence completely vanished from his face, replaced rapidly by a sudden, creeping shade of pale panic. That is impossible, Marcus stammered, his voice losing all of its previous booming authority, cracking slightly. Try it again. Try it on a different machine right now. Eleanor quickly sensed the rising humiliation, desperate to save face in front of the judging dealership staff. She hastily dumped the entire contents of her designer purse onto a nearby leather sofa. Oh, it must simply be a massive banking server outage. She laughed nervously, her voice pitching up a full octave in sheer panic. Here, just use one of mine. It will go right through. She frantically handed over a premium Visa card. The salesman swiped it. Beep, declined. She shoved a platinum MasterCard across the desk, her manicured fingers physically shaking. Beep, declined. Breathing heavily, her eyes wide with mounting terror. She tried a luxury American Express card. Beep, account frozen. In a span of less than 90 seconds, the glorious untouchable Santiago family had been brutally reduced to a frantic, sweating mess of rejected plastic. The salesman stopped smiling entirely. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at the three of them with a very clear, unmistakable expression of deep corporate pity mixed with quiet disgust. They were no longer valuable VIP clients. They were a massive, embarrassing waste of his time. Right at that exact, agonizing moment, Marcus's cell phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. He answered it with a trembling hand, pressing the device to his ear. It was his chief accountant, and the man on the other end of the line was practically hyperventilating in sheer terror. Through the tiny earpiece, Marcus received the catastrophic news. The accountant screamed that every single corporate operating account had suddenly gone dark. The vendor credit lines were completely sealed. The massive cash reserve funds were totally inaccessible. Worse yet, there was absolutely zero cash available to process the massive company payroll scheduled for tomorrow morning. The entire financial infrastructure of Apex Sentinel Group had been abruptly but aggressively seized by an unknown Wall Street entity. I can only imagine the sheer, unadulterated horror that washed over my father's face at that exact second. The grand, towering delusion of his absolute power evaporated into thin air, leaving him completely exposed and utterly powerless. Without saying a single word of explanation or apology to the salesman, Marcus turned on his heel and practically sprinted out of the VIP suite. Dante and Eleanor scrambled awkwardly behind him, abandoning the half-drunk champagne and the customized Porsche 911. As they hurried across the expansive showroom floor, they were followed by the harsh, judging whispers and the barely concealed laughter of the sales staff, who were now openly pointing at them. They rushed outside into the crisp afternoon air, heavily panting and completely disoriented. They needed to get back to the corporate headquarters immediately to assess the monumental damage. Dante ran to Marcus's massive luxury sedan, parked in the VIP loading zone, ready to drive away fast. However, Marcus suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, furiously patting down the pockets of his expensive suit. His face drained of all remaining color. He remembered that the gas tank of his heavy luxury vehicle was completely empty, resting on fumes after a week of aggressive city driving. He instinctively reached for his wallet, only to realize a horrifying truth. Marcus Santiago, the great self-made billionaire, the man who relied entirely on plastic and prestige, did not have a single dollar bill of physical cash in his pockets to pay for a gallon of premium fuel. His metal cards were dead. His digital wallets on his phone were completely frozen by the bank. The ultimate king of the castle was officially stranded. In the most profoundly humiliating conclusion to their grand victory celebration, Dante was forced to step away from the useless luxury car and open a budget ride-share application on his phone, because their premium accounts were all failing across the board. He had to frantically search his digital history to link a forgotten, heavily depleted prepaid debit card just to afford a basic ride. 10 agonizing minutes later, the three highly dressed, incredibly arrogant corporate elites had to squeeze themselves tightly into the back seat of a battered, faintly smelling economy Uber. They rode back to the city center in absolute agonizing silence, their glorious empire crumbling to dust around them while they sat crammed together in a $20 budget ride, thoroughly humiliated and entirely broken. By exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the tension inside the executive boardroom on the top floor of the Apex Sentinel Group headquarters was thick enough to choke on. Marcus, having barely survived his humiliating budget ride-share journey back to the city, was completely frantic. His tie was undone. His face was flushed with a dangerous, unstable shade of red, and he was pacing the length of the massive mahogany table like a trapped, rabid animal. He had immediately summoned a mandatory emergency meeting of the board of directors. Dante sat slouched in a chair near his father, looking completely shell-shocked, while Eleanor hovered nervously in the corner of the room, her eyes darting back and forth, sensing the catastrophic shift in the wind. Marcus slammed his fists down on the wood, loudly declaring to the bewildered, murmuring board members that I, his own daughter, had gone completely insane. He wildly spun a frantic, paranoid narrative, screaming that I had used my technical access to deploy malicious hackers against the banking infrastructure, illegally freezing the company assets in a desperate, vindictive temper tantrum. He was literally foaming at the mouth, demanding my immediate termination, criminal prosecution, and total exile from the industry. Right at the peak of his unhinged, shouting tirade, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. The entire room fell into a dead, absolute silence. I did not walk in carrying a tray of coffee, nor did I have a subordinate technical assistant trailing behind me. Instead, I walked into that room flanked by 6 of the most ruthless, heavily armed legal predators Wall Street had ever produced. They were senior litigation partners from Jonathan Vance's firm, dressed in immaculate, custom-tailored suits, carrying heavy leather briefcases. The sheer, overwhelming aura of corporate power radiating from them sucked the remaining air straight out of the room. Marcus froze, his eyes widening in pure shock. Then, his shock rapidly mutated into explosive, defensive rage. "How dare you show your face in here?" Marcus roared, his voice cracking violently. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. "Security! Get in here right now. Drag this ungrateful criminal out of my building. She is fired. She is completely finished." 2 large security guards stepped forward from the hallway, looking incredibly hesitant. I held up a single, calmly raised hand, and they immediately stopped in their tracks. I walked slowly to the exact center of the long mahogany table. I looked directly into my father's wide, panicking eyes. Without breaking eye contact, I took a massive, heavy stack of legally binding documents from the lead attorney standing to my right. I dropped the enormous file onto the table. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot through the silent, breathless room. "Nobody is dragging me anywhere, Marcus," I said, my voice completely level, echoing with absolute, undeniable authority. "And you do not have the power to fire me. In fact, you no longer have the power to do anything at all in this building." Marcus scoffed, though his voice wavered violently. "What kind of delusional garbage is this? I am the chief executive officer. I founded this company. I own it." "You own absolutely nothing," I corrected him smoothly, tapping the thick stack of papers. "4 years ago, when your precious son nearly drove this entire enterprise into total bankruptcy, a private equity firm called Obsidian Holdings stepped in and purchased all of your toxic, defaulting debt. You signed a master agreement giving them absolute control over the financial destiny of this company in the event of severe executive mismanagement." The board members began frantically flipping through the copies my legal team was now distributing around the table. "What does that have to do with you?" Dante stammered from his chair, his voice shaking with sudden, intense fear. "It has everything to do with me, Dante," I said, turning my cold gaze toward my brother. "Because I am the sole, absolute owner of Obsidian Holdings. I am the anonymous creditor who bailed you out. I personally hold the master notes to your debt, which means I currently possess exactly 80% of the voting shares of the Apex Sentinel Group." The collective gasp from the board of directors was audible. The color completely drained from Marcus's face. He looked exactly like a man who had just been forcefully punched in the stomach. He staggered backward, his legs suddenly failing him, and collapsed heavily into his large, leather chair. The terrifying reality of the situation was finally crashing down on his arrogant mind. The daughter he had spent decades mocking, dismissing, and treating like a corporate servant was secretly the absolute supreme ruler of his entire world. "At exactly 1 o'clock this afternoon," I continued, projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear their new reality, "you unilaterally froze the assets of a senior executive purely out of petty personal malice. That action constituted a severe breach of fiduciary duty and triggered the cross-default clause buried in the original loan agreement. Therefore, as the majority shareholder and supreme creditor, I am officially executing my legal right to seize all collateral." I looked down at the pale, broken man sitting at the head of the table. "Marcus Santiago," I announced coldly, "you are hereby stripped of your title as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. You are permanently removed from the board of directors. Your private equity is seized to cover the outstanding debts you owe my firm. You have lost your company, your status, and your leverage." Before he could even process the absolute destruction of his life, I turned my attention to the sweating, trembling mess of a man sitting next to him. "And as for you, Dante," I sneered, feeling a deep, overwhelming wave of satisfaction, "your pathetic charade ends today. You are officially terminated from this company for gross, repeated incompetence. You will receive 0 severance pay. You have exactly 15 minutes to clear your desk and exit the premises before these security guards physically throw you out onto the street." Dante opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked desperately toward his wife for support, but Eleanor's reaction was perhaps the most ruthless moment of the entire afternoon. The cunning, gold-digging woman took one look at her husband, completely stripped of his inheritance, his title, and his wealth, and her expression morphed into pure, unadulterated disgust. Without a single ounce of hesitation, Eleanor violently yanked the massive diamond wedding ring off her finger. She threw it directly at Dante's chest. It bounced off him and clattered loudly against the floorboards. "You are absolutely useless," Eleanor hissed venomously at Dante. She turned her back on the broken family, grabbed her designer handbag, and stormed out of the boardroom without looking back. She had aligned herself with power, and the moment Dante became a broke, unemployed liability, she discarded him like trash. Marcus sat completely paralyzed in his chair, staring blankly at the polished wood of the table. He had lost his company, his wealth, and his dignity, entirely because he wanted to use his money to crush his daughter. He had desperately tried to teach me a lesson about knowing my place. I calmly walked around the large table and stood beside the grand, high-backed leather chair at the head of the room, the chairman's seat. Marcus did not fight back as the security guards gently but firmly pulled him up and escorted him toward the door, following his sobbing, devastated son. When the room finally cleared of the toxic, arrogant men who had tried to ruin my life, I took my seat. I sat back in the chairman's chair, resting my hands on the smooth leather armrests. I turned my head and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, admiring the stunning, sprawling skyline of downtown Seattle. The sun was beginning to set, casting a brilliant golden glow over the city. A quiet, deeply peaceful smile crossed my face as I fully absorbed the absolute silence of the room. I had finally realized the ultimate truth of the corporate world. True power does not lie in shouting loudly or arrogantly ordering people around. True power lies quietly in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to prove that you are the one who writes the rules of the game. Thank you all so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country down in the comments. As I mentioned earlier, if you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please remember that YouTube has demonetized our channel, and we will not be able to upload new videos here for the foreseeable future. We are relying on your support as we move completely to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining our Patreon community, where you can listen to our very best, longest, and most exclusive true revenge stories that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by using the direct link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you once again for your incredible support, and I cannot wait to see you over on Patreon for our next grand finale.